Hi, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to be looking at submixes in the MPC Standalone, when you would use them, why you would use them, and how to bounce them into your DAW if that's your workflow. They can be really useful in mixing, but they can also be useful in collating programs together if you need to supply stems to another producer, another engineer or studio. Let's jump in. So why would you use submixes on the MPC? Well, there's a number of reasons. The way that I use them is the same way I use mix buses on a mixing desk. So I break up my drums into kicks, low percussion and high percussion, and then percussion. I have a group for bass, I have a group for different instruments, be it synths or guitars or horns, and then I have a mix bus for vocals, or in this case a submix for vocals. And with them routed to submixes, I can process them together, so I can have a group of vocals with the same compression and EQ. I can have all my hi-hats if I'm building a top line with all the same compression and EQ. You get the picture. But also it's a good way to bounce out stems if you need to send stems to another producer, sound engineer or a mastering engineer for stem mastering. Well, also remember on the MPC One and the Live 2, Live 1, you don't have the same amount of outputs that you have on something like the X. So submixes can help with that limitation. So I think the best way to demonstrate this would be to have a track loaded up on the MPC, and I'll show you how I would break that up into submixes. So this is just a mock-up track that I've done. It's a couple of bars. And what I'll do is I'll run through the track and show you how I've broken it up into different submixes and give you the reasons behind that as well. So what I've done is I've used a couple of different programs for the drums. The reason I've done this is because I want to show you that submixes is really useful if you're using multiple programs. So for instance, I've got a couple of drums on my Curse Bass kit. Then I've got some drums on the Django Food kit. I've also got two different programs for the bass, the Mini D and bassline. And then I've got some percussion. And then I've got a couple of audio tracks, Vox 1, Vox 2. So I'll show you how I break it up. So if you go into track mix, initially you will have programs, but if you scroll here, you can go to different tracks, audio tracks, MIDI tracks, and you can go to submixes. So you can see here that you've got 8 submixes on the MPC One and on the Live 2. I've never used the X, but I think it's the same on the X as well. Pretty certain it is. Then you have main outputs, etc. here as well. So here you can see your submixes. So if I go into my different drum sounds, if I go into pad mix, here you have a group of options along the bottom here: level, pan, mute, send, insert. Now if you go to route, you can see that you can route your instruments on your pads to different subsets, different submixes. So my kicks I have on submix 1, I have hi-hats, etc., high percussion on submix 3, and let's just see if we can find some snare drums and claps. You see I have those on submix 2. This is the way that I've broken my drums up since the 80s, to be honest. I have all my kicks on a mix bus 1. I have my low percussion, which is snares, claps, toms, on mix bus 2, or submix 2 in this case, and hi-hats will be on 3, percussion will be on 4, and bass, etc. will go gradually to the right on the mixing desk. In this case, I've got the bass on 5, I think, and vocals on 8. So as you can see, if you go into pad mix, you can choose your particular instrument, particular pad, and you can change the submix. As I said, these are all claps and snares, so I've got these on submix 2. Let's go back here, kicks on submix 1. So if we come out and then we go into instruments, we have bass synth here, obviously, and we go into programs here. Here you can see I've got bassline and I've got the Mini D here. Now again, if you go into root, you can see that I've sent those to submix 5. So that's pretty easy. But remember, that's in programs because obviously this is an instrument. And also, if I come out here and I now go to, go into my audio, so I'll go into my vocals. Again, if you go into track mix, we can go into audio tracks, and you can see here that I've assigned these to sub 8. And just to give you a quick reason why I break my percussion up the way that I do and the way that I break up submixes, because I want to EQ and compress them together to create cohesion in these particular submixes. I think of the instruments in frequency ranges. That's why I have all my kicks on sub 1 and my snares and low percussion on sub 2 and hi-hats on sub 3, because generally snare drums and claps, they take up some lows and some low mids, maybe a little bit of highs, high mids. Hi-hats don't tend to have any low end really on them at all. Kind of 200 hertz upwards, you might have something. So there I want to process them together. So they would be in the same sub. So then I can apply EQ in the high mids and the highs. Also transient information, think of it in terms like that as well. Snares and claps tend to have the same transient information, so I can process them together if I'm using any kind of transient plugins. And that's how you kind of need to think. That's how I break things up. Instrument wise, you know, I know from experience that guitars and lead synths tend to take up the same frequency range, so I might process them together in a sub or a mix bus if it's on a desk rather than in my MPC. Pads, you know, strings, those kind of things, they're in a similar frequency range. So if you start thinking and start breaking down your track in those terms, remember you've got 8 subs in the MPC, so you are limited. But those limitations, in a way, I think you start thinking of workarounds, you start thinking of the limitations. They help you be creative, I think, is the way that I look at it. So, you know, you don't have to break up your subs the same way that I do. That's just the way that I've done it since the 80s, with sub 1 being kicks, 2 being snares and claps, etc. But also, okay, so let's just think of it. If we now go into the subs, for instance, okay, so we go into our sub mixes here. I'm trying to keep this simple because it's quite a lot to take in. I'm trying to kind of keep it in order. So now you can see that we have our sub mixes, okay. There's some percussion on sub 4, by the way. Kicks are on 1, etc., as I've explained. So now if I want to, say, process submix 2, which is just going to be the snares, etc., I can go into the effects chain on the submix. I can add some transients. I can add some EQ, some compression. But EQing and compressing them and processing them together adds that cohesion, brings the drum kit into the same room, so it sounds like a real drum kit rather than a selection of different drum kits and a selection of different programs. So that's why I've done that in this situation. And then obviously with vocals, it's great because I've got my vocals on submix 8, and then on submix 8 I can do all my kind of vocal processing in one go. Now I can still process the individual vocals if I want, like say for instance one of the vocals needs some serious kind of like work surgery on some rumble, or some needs to be chopped up, maybe needs some de-essing, and you can de-ess in the MPC. There's a video about that I've done explaining how you can do it. So I can do those individual things on each individual vocal, but then I can bring them all into one submix and I can process them together. I can compress them together, so I can have a group of backing vocals, a group of lead vocals, and then bring them all together so they're all in one room and they sound cohesive. They sound like they're supposed to be done at the same time, and they could be from studios all over the world, but I want to bring them into the same room, and I can do that. And submixes or mix buses, if you're on a mixing desk, can really, really help you do that. So there, you know, you can see on submix 8 I can add my effects, etc. So this is all great from a mixing point of view, but let's say, for instance, I want to bounce out all my low percussion or all my hi-hats or all my vocals into a stem, and I want to send them to another studio for mixing with a mix engineer, or I want to send stems to a mastering engineer for stem mastering. Really, really easy in the MPC, and I love this. If you go into the save window, okay, here we have audio mixdown. Here's your audio mixdown page. Now here with stereo output, it defaults to out 1, 2 on the MPC one. But if you turn to the left with your scroll wheel, you can choose submixes. So you can bounce each one of your submixes out as a collection. So all my vocals will be on submix 8. I can bounce those out. I can have the main inserts in there if I've added any compression or EQ on the main output, or I can take that off, or I leave it on, etc. You don't want to explode the tracks, because exploding the tracks is going to split the tracks up, and I don't want to do that. I want my 3 or 4 vocals just bounced out as a stem. And then, once I've done that, if I go into my MPC projects, go into the project here, I've made a folder inside this project for stems, go in here, and you can see that I've got all of the stems already bounced, submix bass, submix hats, submix kicks, etc. And then I can then send those stems to another sound engineer or mixing engineer or mastering engineer or another studio producer, etc. So there you have it, submixes. I hope that that wasn't too overwhelming and too complicated. I tried to do it in such a way that it's easy to break down. But basically the concept is that you're grouping instruments together in submixes so that you can process them together, and it just makes the mixing process easier, and it brings more cohesion or glue into your mix. And it's just a good way, it's a good mixing concept to have in your workflow. And it's not that difficult in the MPC, and I kind of like the fact that you have 8 submixes. You know, it was the same way when you had a smaller mixing desk and you only had 8 mix buses to play with. It forces you to be creative, and I like that. You know, I think keep things as simple as you possibly can is always the best way, at least it has been for me. Also, this concept will be the same when the new MPC3 software comes out and MPC4 software, etc., etc., etc. The concept is the same. It's a really, really good workflow to get into. So thank you so much for watching. This is the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.